Growing nuclear capabilities in China are causing concern for the United States, their allies and partners around the world. There is increasing evidence of a significant expansion of the nuclear arsenal, although the Chinese government denies this information. It seems that the motivation behind such expansion is the desire of Chinese leaders to maintain the credibility of their nuclear deterrence and assert their position in the modern world. In 2021, satellite images depicted the construction of approximately 300 missile silos in western and north-central parts of China, where intercontinental ballistic missiles could eventually be deployed. These images serve as further evidence supporting recent U.S. assumptions that China plans a significant increase in its nuclear arsenal. According to the latest Pentagon report, China has produced about 100 nuclear warheads over the past year. According to Pentagon estimates, Beijing's pace of increasing its nuclear weapon stockpile exceeds previous U.S. forecasts. In last year's Pentagon report, it was noted that Beijing was rapidly modernizing its nuclear forces, but was expected to increase them at a slower pace and have 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035. However, the Pentagon now predicts that by 2030, China intends to deploy more than 1,000 nuclear warheads, cementing its status as the world's third nuclear power after the United States and Russia. To achieve this, China is likely to use new fast neutron reactor breeder and reprocessing capacities for plutonium production, officially referred to by Chinese authorities as part of peaceful atomic research. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, as of January 2023, Russia had 5,880 nuclear warheads, and the United States had 5,200. However, China refuses to participate in nuclear disarmament negotiations with the United States and Russia, claiming that the arsenals of these two countries are much larger than its own. In the U.S. Nuclear Policy Review, it was stated that China's nuclear arsenal modernization and lack of transparency have raised questions about the country's future intentions. In August 2021, Admiral Charles Richard, commander of the U.S. Strategic Command responsible for American nuclear forces, stated that China's expansion of both conventional and nuclear forces is so extensive that it takes your breath away, and that this buildup represents a strategic breakthrough. Such an arms buildup may signify a fundamental departure from the policy China has adhered to for the past few decades. Following its first successful nuclear test in 1964, China adopted a doctrine of minimal nuclear deterrence. This doctrine involved refraining from engaging in an arms race with other major powers, declaring a policy of no first use of nuclear weapons, and maintaining nuclear forces at a minimum level necessary for China to credibly deter potential adversaries. By pursuing this course, China sought to protect itself from nuclear threats and coercion, while avoiding diverting resources crucial for economic development. China adhered to the minimal deterrence doctrine for several decades after 1964, although from the 1980s onward, it began a gradual modernization of its nuclear arsenal. By the early 2000s, China likely possessed only a few dozen nuclear warheads capable of reaching U.S. territory, all of which were deployed in silos, making them unsafe. Since then, China has made significant strides in modernizing its nuclear forces. It has deployed ICBMs on trucks, equipped some of its strategic missiles with independently targeted warheads, and commissioned its first ballistic missile-carrying submarines. China has also increased the size of its nuclear arsenal, although until recently, it appeared to still maintain small and effective nuclear forces instead of pursuing numerical parity with the United States and Russia. For many years, China has been concerned that American missile defense systems, precision conventional weapons, and nuclear arsenal modernization could undermine the reliability of its own nuclear deterrent. Until recently, however, Chinese leaders believed that the country was not facing an immediate external threat, and that this concern could be alleviated by implementing its own gradual nuclear weapons modernization program. This situation appears to have changed in recent years. However, China's official defense white paper, published in 2019, reaffirms the country's policy of no first use of nuclear weapons. Additionally, the document stipulates that China refrains from engaging in an arms race with other countries and maintains nuclear capabilities at a minimum level necessary for national security. The paper states that the goal of China's nuclear arsenal is to deter other countries from using or threatening to use nuclear weapons against China. It appears that China's motivation in this nuclear buildup reflects a particular concern about the country's ability to maintain nuclear deterrence, as well as a broader desire to ensure sufficient military power that commands respect amidst growing competition among global powers. Jeffrey Lewis, an expert at the Middlebury Institute, believes that one of the primary goals of China's construction of missile silos, potentially for housing DF-41 missiles, is to maintain the credibility of nuclear preclusion. China wants to ensure that after an initial nuclear strike from the United States, its nuclear forces can survive in sufficient numbers to deliver a retaliatory strike capable of overcoming American missile defense systems. Despite the monumental growth of the nuclear industry by modern standards, China is not seeking to provoke a nuclear war, but rather, on the contrary, is striving to mitigate tensions. Just recently, China called on states with the largest nuclear arsenals to agree to a no-first use of nuclear weapons against each other. Sun Xiaobo, Director General of the Department of Arms Control at the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, urged nuclear states to fulfill their special and priority responsibilities for nuclear disarmament, in accordance with the UN Convention at the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. States possessing nuclear weapons should negotiate and conclude an agreement on the non-first use of nuclear weapons against each other, or make a political statement to that effect. As known, Russia and the United States have the world's largest nuclear arsenals. China and India are the only nuclear states officially adhering to the policy of no first use. Moreover, the Chinese diplomat believes that attention should be paid to the development of international norms and countering new scientific and technical challenges in such areas as artificial intelligence, outer space, and cyberspace. He described the international situation regarding strategic security as facing new challenges, and that countries with the strongest military forces have repeatedly violated treaties to achieve their own absolute superiority. Despite such statements, a very important question arises. What is the ultimate goal of China's expansion of its nuclear arsenals? Michael Chase, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for China, wrote in 2019 that Chinese nuclear policy could take several paths. First, China may focus solely or nearly exclusively on creating capabilities for assured retaliation. Following this path, China is likely to adhere to a strategy outlined in its official documents, including the principle of no first use of nuclear weapons, and may deploy from 300 to 400 nuclear warheads over the next 15 years. China may adopt a policy of conditional no first use of nuclear weapons, which would lower the nuclear threshold to try to deter attacks using non-nuclear means against strategic targets. This path may involve deploying from 500 to 800 nuclear warheads over the next 15 years, but most likely without deploying tactical nuclear weapons. Third, China may seek nuclear parity with the United States and Russia. Following this path, China will abandon commitments to no first use of nuclear weapons and create combat capabilities. It will deploy 1,000 or more nuclear warheads and may also deploy tactical weapons. Recent evidence suggests that China is at least on the second path, but it cannot be ruled out that over time it will choose the third path. The Chinese people are highly educated and cunning, and predicting their plans will be very difficult. Due to the growing tensions in the world and the potential conflict over Taiwan, the Chinese authorities are trying to prepare to the maximum extent possible. At this stage of its development, China follows the principle, if you want peace, prepare for war. And China is preparing, but let us hope that politicians can come to agreements, that common sense will prevail, and that all nuclear arsenals will remain only as elements of deterrence rather than means of deployment.